All right, Derek, you want to get us online? We are online. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let's go ahead and get going. This particular session is on hemp insights and experience from the University of Florida and the IFAS as part of their research project related to the hemp program. So Dr. Zach Brym is going to lead this session. I do want to make one comment real quick here. We are going to do a demonstration. If anybody wants to see a mobile decoricator, we're going to have one out in the parking lot at 3 o'clock. So at that break, be out this back door, cross into the parking lot. Steve Edmonds has brought his unit. It's not an elaborate system, does like a half a ton an hour, but for those folks that want to start being able to process, it might be an option and look at what Steve did. So with that, sir, I'm turning it over to you.
Well, thank you, Gene, and thanks, folks, for choosing to return to session after lunch. Appreciate you being here and the folks online as well. I am Zach Brym from the University of Florida Hemp Program, and I brought a team with me today, so we'll have a chance to introduce ourselves and then go through a couple presentations with information, looking at the acreage of hemp permitted and approved for harvest in the state, looking at some nutrient management work that we've been doing through some of the research program, and the experience from a couple of our extension agents and what they've been doing, working directly with farmers in on-farm trials. And then we're going to try something new. We're going to give you a chance to work with us, do a little bit of a workshop, do a little bit of an interactive to get familiar with the types of things farmers might be thinking about ahead of planting one of their crops. So I'm just going to open it up to my team to, again, give the introductions, and then we'll follow up with our presentations.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jay Capasso, the row crop agent for Columbia County Extension.
Ethan Carter. I'm up in the Panhandle, Jackson County Extension.
I'm Matt Smith, Sustainable Agriculture Agent in Sumter, Pasco, and Hernando County.
Good afternoon, Jerry Fankhauser, Assistant Director of the Florida Ag Experiment Station. That's the research arm of FIHCE, and also the lead oversight manager for the hemp research program.
Special thanks goes out to Jerry. He's the one that keeps us out of trouble, out of jail, as we've been hearing earlier. Of course, that oversight and logistics is necessary for us to do our work across the University of Florida. One more time, I am Zach Brym. I am agroecologist at the Tropical Research and Education Center down in Miami-Dade County and lead for the hemp program at FIHCE. So thanks again for joining us, and we will get started with Matt Smith and his report on acreage.
Thank you, Zach. So let me get this back up here. So I got some fresh data here for you. And check this out. Yep, works great. All right, so my name's Matt Smith, Sustainable Agriculture Agents. It basically means that I work with anything in Sumter, Pasco, and Hernando County that breathes carbon dioxide and you can make money off of. So that's nursery crops, food crops, and also to a growing extent, industrial hemp as well. Today I'm going to talk with you about permitted acreage and also approvals for actual harvest in the state of Florida 2020 to 2021. And in 2021, our data goes until about early November or so. So we'll talk about a couple of things on this. I'm going to start out giving you all kind of an overview of the cultivation license process and a little bit on harvested lot approval, just so you have a background and idea of what growers have to go through in order to be able to grow and then harvest industrial hemp. And then we'll get into permitted acreage reports and also harvest acreage reports. And there's a little difference between the two of those. So starting out with cultivation licenses and harvested lot approval. So if you want to grow industrial hemp in the state of Florida, one, it's got to be commercial, and two, you can't just walk out the door and start growing it. You got to go through a cultivation license process. There's a few steps to it, but it's not really overly complicated. One nice thing about it, there's no minimum or maximum acreage requirements. As long as you are a commercial endeavor, you can grow hemp. There's no minimum acreage kind of deal. There's no maximum acreage kind of deal. The license itself is free. There's very few barriers to entry to actually get these grower permits. They are annual permits, so after a year you have to go ahead and renew those. It's all pretty much online through the FIHCE cannabis websites, and they're going to do all their communication electronically as well. This is an example of the page that you would go to whenever you were trying to actually set it up. You saw there, but I filled it out for Homer J. Simpson. There's a few things on there. So one, they want to know your business location, but also your grow site location as well. And if you have multiple grow sites, you'll have to put that in as well. They want to know the exact acreage that you're looking to grow at in either terms of acreage or in terms of square feet, what the zoning is there. We'll make sure there's no conflicts on that side of things. And then also if you are going to be storing that hemp material off-site or even on-site, they want those locations as well. The last thing you got to do, and this is one of the, I guess, the biggest barriers to entry, but it's not that much, is you do have to go and undergo an annual background check and fingerprinting through a live scan service provider. They're all over the state. It's not a very big deal. And the thing I kind of really want to emphasize with this cultivation license is that it is not a huge barrier to entry. So it's something that anybody who's even interested in growing industrial hemp, if you are interested in growing it at all, this is the first step you have to use. So a lot of people will get this, and then it's a question of, okay, am I actually going to grow? Some do, but a lot of them don't. Once you do actually decide that you do want to grow industrial hemp, you've got your cultivation permits, it's all in order, you grow it, and you're getting close to the harvest kind of period. Well, they want to make sure that whatever it is that you are harvesting is not going to exceed that Delta-9 THC threshold established by law, so 0.3%. So within 30 days of harvest, a representative sample is going to be taken of whatever lot it is that you're planning to harvest. It has to be sent to an approved lab, and they're going to do the analysis on it. And once that comes back all good, you got 30 days to harvest. The grower's going to pay the lab fees, and if you do exceed that threshold, there are some steps that you as a grower can take to, you can retest it, I think 2 extra times, and hopefully get it to a point where it's going to be able to be sold. So at this point now, you know, the barrier to entry for getting a permit, pretty darn low. The barrier to entry to actually growing the crop, a lot more. Farming is a much bigger investment than just going ahead and, you know, getting a background check and filling out an online form. So getting now into permitted acreage. So this is going to be the acreage that is permitted to actually grow industrial hemp in the state of Florida. So this is not necessarily acreage where something has been planted. This is just the permitted side of things. So all of this jumped off in 2020, and the application process for permits started up April 28th. And so I was curious about the first kind of 6 months of that rollout, just kind of see like how quick that jump off was. And there was a lot of enthusiasm for industrial hemp and these permits. So found that between that launch period to September 29th, you had 592 cultivation permits that were approved. And I say it jumped off quickly, it jumped off really quickly. So during that first week, you had 159 licenses, which represented 27% of that 6-month area. And over half of those licenses were approved by May 27th. And you can see like April looks like a much smaller number than May, but keep in mind too that this started April 28th. So that's, you know, 2 days worth, or 3 days worth. And then you go into May. So really big jump off from that beginning period. So if we look at 2021 and 2020, here is just the straight up totals we have. So 891 permitted sites and a little over 23,000 permitted acres in 2020. And then in 2021, you have 731 permitted sites representing about 8,340 acres, which is neat, but when you get down to different regions geographically, it gets a lot more interesting. So first, though, I had to take a step back and explain a little bit how University of Florida breaks apart the state of Florida, because that's what most of our data here was broken into. So we break it up into 5 different regions. So starting from the northwest and working all the way down into the southeast. So you can kind of see northwest right there, northeast, your central district right there, and then your southwest and your southeast area. So you've got kind of an idea of the geography so far? Cool. So when we look into the permitted sites on this, we can see that first and foremost, that southeast area is just really big. And a lot of these come from like the Miami-Dade kind of area. Southwest and Central, one of the interesting things is looking at where it grew and where it kind of dropped off. And you really see between 2020 and 2021, in most of those regions drop off. And they drop off by a pretty even percentage. But there's a little more interest that you see in the Northwest that pops up when you get from 2020 to 2021. In terms of permitted acreage, again, that southeast area for 2020 is huge, and it's the big majority. I actually tried to see if there was a way that I could do this table to take care of that outlier a little bit so you could see the differences between them a little more. But you see kind of just an overall decline in permitted acreage between each kind of region. But you can see that Northwest one, they had a little more permits be approved in 2021. That acreage stays about the same on there. It's much, much closer than the other ones. So now getting through that, we can talk a bit more about the harvested acreage. So that permitted side, again, that was just the areas that were permitted to grow industrial hemp. It doesn't mean that hemp was actually planted on those areas. It was just, this is the areas that would be authorized. If you want to grow hemp on them, you can. You don't have to. There's no requirements to grow them. So we'll start out on kind of a national level for 2021. So USDA released a pretty cool detailed summary of the national picture. And they released that in February of 2022. And they found, nationwide, we had a little over 54,000 actual acres of hemp planted in the United States. Of those, you had about 33,500 acres that were actually harvested. There's a big difference between that. That can be for a variety of reasons. You can have lots that exceeded that 0.3% threshold that couldn't be harvested, disease, weather, anything like that. There's a lot of different factors that they kind of go over in the report somewhat, but why you would see a big drop-off between that in terms of planted acreage and harvested acreage. For the most part in the United States, most folks are growing for floral, at least on the open field area. In terms of acreage, it's fairly tightly, closes in kind of a bit with fiber hemp with about 12,700 acres. Value-wise, you can see, and you kind of might expect, floral hemp is really leading the pack on that. Really cool document. Highly recommend you check it out if you're a stats and econ nerd like me. So getting now to the state of Florida. So in Florida, I broke it down based on approved lots, so individual lot samples that were sent off to the lab, and then how many acres that represents. So our first year of production, 2020, 277 lots were approved, representing about 250 acres of production in the state. In 2021, interesting thing kind of happens. You see a big jump in the number of approved lots, but then a slight decrease in the amount of acreage. And the key thing to note on this is that this is covering all acreage in the state of Florida, and it's all presented in terms of acres. So both our field production, but also our protected structure greenhouse production is put in this as well. And again, it kind of gets more fun at the regional level when we start breaking down and looking at how this breaks out throughout the state. But I have to step back again because this data was graciously provided by the Florida Department of Ag, and they do districts a little differently than we do at UF. So one little tight break into geography. So instead of 5 regions, FDAX breaks it up in terms of cannabis at least into 3 regions. So we have our northern region right here, we have our central region, and there's us right there, and then the southern region right in here. So when we break into that, things kind of get a little more interesting as well. So when we look at it from the northern district, the central district, and the southern district, year after year, one thing that we see is that approved lots jump up pretty considerably throughout the entire state of Florida, as you might expect from the previous slide. But you really see a lot of big movement happening in that southern region as well. When we look into breakdowns of our top 5 highest performing counties, you've got Highlands County in number 1 in 2020, and a lot of people in the central portion as well, so your Lake, Orange, Alachua County, and then Palm Beach representing for the southern districts. In 2021, you get kind of that shift again. Orange County is still in that top 5 area, but you start to see much rapid movement of people in the southern area, particularly in Palm Beach and then in Miami-Dade as well. And the rest of them are central kind of district area. So that's our lots. Now we're going to go into our actual approved acreage. This is 2020 through 2021. One of the interesting things that happens is what's going on here in that northern district right there. So in the northern districts of the state, you had a pretty big drop. The interesting thing about that is that northern portion of the state, you're usually dealing with a lot larger acreage per business than the southern area of the state. You start to see smaller properties, probably growing in protected structures, greenhouses, things like that, where it's more concentrated, high production kind of stuff. Whereas in that northern area, if you had a few farms that decided not to replant, 2 or 3 farms could easily explain that. I don't have that granular of a data, but I'm just saying, like, easily in that northern area, you could have big movements like that based on just a couple of farms changing. What's interesting, though, is that we do see, even though overall we had a bit of a reduction in acreage in 2021 from 2020, we see really big scale-ups, both in the central area of the state and then also in the southern area of the state. This one doubles, this one near about triples or so. In 2020, our biggest producer was Lafayette County at 60 acres, and again, that's going to be in that northern district area. So you could have just a couple of farmers in that area who decided, for whatever reason, not to plant as many acres or any acres this year, and that could have a big drop there. But a lot more interest and successful harvest. This is approved acreage. These are people who have got their plots ready for harvest, they've submitted them from approval, and they've actually been able to harvest them. A lot more movement in that central and southern area. I mean, you can see, Miami-Dade really picking up here. They weren't even in the top 5 at all. Now they're in number 2. Hardy County's moved up to number 1 from number 4. So it's interesting movements. Another thing, I was able to speak with somebody at FDAX this week, got a little bit of some data for 2022 so far. Again, we're very early in the season, but right now we already have had 35 acres approved for harvest statewide, representing 149 lots. So that's about it on the permitted acreage side. I do want to give a special shout out to Hallie Bell and Nicole Casuso, people over at Department of Ag. They were really helpful getting some of this data, especially in terms of the actual harvested acreage. In terms of the cultivation permit data, I worked really closely with Dr. Chris Christensen at University of Florida. He's a full GIS wizard, and he really helped out with getting that together. And then, as always, Dr. Zach Brym for keeping our team together. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Matt. Hopefully we have some numbers folks in the room that found that interesting. Yeah. Do we have some questions? Do we want to pass around a microphone? Go ahead.
So if they get permitted every year, is that 20 versus 21 data indicating that, especially in the northern region, less people are getting their acreage re-permitted? So maybe they did it in 20 and now they're not doing it in 21?
So the question is expecting a year-long permit period if kind of we're able to track the specific farms or the way that farms are renewing or not renewing their licenses year to year.
I don't have that data in terms of actual farm to farm. We've never really tried to get it down that granular. What I would say, though, is if it's a question of if they're renewing year on year, that data I feel like would more pop up in terms of missing acreage or permits in 2022. But this one was just looking at 2020 through 2021. So if they did decide, if they got their permits on, the earliest they could, June 28th of 2020, they would have had to renew by July 28th of 2021. I think the only data we could possibly be missing is if anybody had gotten their permits in, say, December of 2020, because the data that we have for 2021 only extends to the beginning of November. So anybody who was November or December, they wouldn't have necessarily been in that list. But we will have that for when we do the 2022.
Thanks, great question. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, good afternoon. Heather McGuire from Rents McGuire Acres. And do you have any data on acres that was permitted and planted, but was unable to harvest due to, multiple reasons. It could have been because it went hot. It could have been because of weather. Like, for example, we planted twice, but we had to, it was destroyed by rain and we had to destroy. So do you have any data on that?
Yes, ma'am. So not for 2020, but I do have for 2021 and right now in 2022. The data that I have, though, is just for lots that were rejected by the labs. This does not have to do with any kind of weather issues or anything like that. This is just plants that exceeded the threshold and they were not able to be harvested. And so for 2021, again, that was an approved acreage of 208 acres. The unacceptable amount was 45 acres, representing about 11.8%. And then right now in 2022, with 35 acres accepted, we have 0.752 acres that were not.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question for us as well, because there's that challenge of capturing the whole story. So, big thanks to our friends at FDX Division of Plant Industries that are helping us collect this information, making that information available publicly. Those are public records as well. But we just have the two ends of the snapshot. Everybody that's licensed to cultivate hemp, and then the folks that were approved for harvest or denied harvest. And so we're going to be sending out a survey in the next week or so to everybody on that license holders list and folks that are in communication with the University of Florida, trying to add that piece of information. Did you plant? Did you harvest? So that we can start capturing that part of the story as well. So when you folks get that email from me, please consider taking the time to fill out that survey. It'd be very helpful.
And if I may quickly correct myself, so currently it's 3 acres that were not accepted, representing 0.75% of 2022. I said 0.75 acres.
Okay. It's still not a lot. It's
still not very
it's not
much,
a big number for the acreage that's denied harvested. So
It's really not. Most of the hemp tests decently below that 0.3% threshold.
any other questions for our economist?
So big, and then just the visual of the plant, much like that probably isn't a real plant right there. I've bought some imitation plants for the store, but I really would like to go through the grow process in the store with the space we have. It's a big warehouse space, and I haven't really found any information on there, but it seems like you can easily get a permit to grow, and I don't have any intent to cultivate for production or to resell. I just want to grow to show, and then either terminate or maybe move it along the process with somebody else. But are you aware, can I just get the permit and grow in my facility for the purpose of showing and educating?
Do you want to answer that question?
If you qualified for the license, you get issued the license. When somebody asks the question, can I do a home grow, just so that I can grow it for my own use, the answer is no. Commercial cultivation, like Matt said. So if you had no intention of harvesting, you wouldn't have to have samples collected by a lab and a COA presented. But just like if you happen to fail at a crop, you need to document that disposal so that when our inspector comes out there, we're going to ask those questions. What did you grow this year? And if you grew 2 acres, then where's the harvest report? And it was destroyed, we'd want that documentation that it was destroyed. We don't have inspectors that come out to complete the disposal form. That's on the grower. And it's the same thing that happens when a crop fails due to the THC level exceeding the threshold. They have to fill out this form and destroy those, or go through the process of having it resampled. But yes, they document it themselves, and when we do our inspection, we look at those documents. But it's much like a nursery. You say you want to grow them to show. A nursery can sell nursery stock and move it to a cultivator that has a license, but they don't, that's not considered a harvest, so they didn't have to do a COA to move that product.
Thank you, fellas. I'll proceed with the next presentation, if we can get it on the screen. So again, with many thanks to FDACS and in this case their Office of Agricultural Water Policy, we've been able to develop a nutrient management research program at the University of Florida, and that is a real thrust for my work and the several folks that are listed here on the slide as well. And so this was an opportunity for me to share a very specific aspect of the hemp research that we conduct at the University of Florida. And so I just want to describe why this is important. It comes along with a couple pieces to consider. One is the fertility requirements for production, so that we can understand the nutrition that these plants need in order to put on marketable yields. Then, of course, there's also the consequences of applying fertilizer to agricultural land, which is the release of those nutrients outside of the system through leaching. And that comes with the environmental impacts of this plant. But perhaps more so for farmers with basin management action plans, they have to enroll in a specific program through the state called Best Management Practices. And so these farmers must enroll and operate under research-derived guidelines. Does anybody have any idea what kind of research-derived guidelines there are for hemp production in Florida? Yeah, formally none. I'm about to show you some of the first, pieces of that, but it's a really interesting challenge for our university regulator partnership. It's like, hey guys, we need some guidelines. And it's like, okay, hey guys, we need some time and some resources, and we're moving along with that. Of course, once you have those guidelines to operate, you have to be good at record keeping, and then just as the hemp farmers have their annual inspections for permit compliance for hemp, there's also the additional layer here for nutrient management. So as I mentioned, hemp farmers must enroll in BMP, but there are not yet established hemp BMPs. So what is best management practices, and how do we report these in general? Well, you might hear folks talk about the 4 R's, and so it is nutrient management with the right source, right rate, right time, and a right place. And so each of these things takes an experiment in many different places in order to understand how to do this for this crop. When you come to think about source, you have synthetic or organic sources, mixtures, and different compounds, or single applications. You can put it out as dry, you can put it out as liquid, maybe you have a polymer coat around it to control the release. And then, of course, along with the source, it's interacting with the rate, the time, and the place. So it really comes down to understanding your soil, right? It comes down to understanding your plant, and it comes down to understanding the season and the system that you're working on. So we're working to put some of these pieces together. In the meantime, as the research is coming along, I'm just encouraging everybody to be aware, kind of reflect on their agroecosystem, on their farm, what they've experienced from other crops, and what they know about growing hemp. And at the end of the day, when someone comes asking for your nutrient records, make sure you got some of them for them. So we did put something together back in 2020 just to have a literature review and some information available to farmers. And so we went out and we collected literature from across the world, the history of hemp cultivation. We also talked to a bunch of soil testing laboratories in the southern region and came up with these preliminary guidelines to provide farmers as they're working to enroll in best management practices. And so just to kind of read these points, the nitrogen. So one thing that we're learning is that hemp is actually a pretty demanding crop in terms of fertilizer. There are soils that already have a background rate of nitrogen in other parts of the world, other parts of the country. Florida is not so lucky with the types of soils that we have. Particularly down in my area in Homestead, where we crush up the rock in order to do agriculture, it's very kind of folks to call it soil. And so we're talking right now about 50 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per the acre. That's kind of like the range of all crops in Florida. So we're still working on narrowing that range, but we have seen across the literature and some of our research that 150 pounds really is a maximum. So you can certainly consider drawing back from that. Less for the fiber because excessive fertilizer, excessive nitrogen has been shown to decrease fiber quality. And so you really want to be careful. Please don't dump the whole bucket on your field. It's not necessary. And more so, why don't you split that bucket up and put it across the year because our soils are very permeable and nutrients and water move through the system very quickly. So you want to give the plant a little bit at a time so that the plant has access to it. The phosphorus, we probably have our best chance to use soil tests in order to do that. And these rates apply based on whether your soil comes back as low, medium, or high in background rates. The plants will uptake as much as 20 to 70 pounds of potassium across the acre. The phosphorus, potassium, I'm mixing up my words here a little bit. The potassium is a similar situation where you want to test your soil and try to compare that with these rates. So this is all research outside of Florida and mostly grain and fiber, so we've got a lot of work to do. And this is the beginnings of our research across the state. So we had one indoor location looking at fertility management in containers, and then 3 sites across the state. Let's see, this one here is the West Florida Research and Education Center, J Florida in the Panhandle. This is the Plant Science Research and Education Unit in Citra, Florida, so our central location. And this is my plot here down in Homestead at the Tropical Research and Education Center. So this is very exciting for me, a slide that I can show you a picture and a whole bunch of data. It might be a little overwhelming, so let me take a step through and talk you through it. So this is just, let's see. I went back. There we go. This is just a visual representation of what the research showed. So we started with 0 parts per million nitrogen, went all the way up to 600 parts per million nitrogen. And in this case, it was a continuous dose. So the scientists at the Mid-Florida Research and Education Center, they made sure that these plants had that amount of nitrogen during the entire time. And they followed the growth along the year. And so this red one down here is the growth pattern with the 0 parts per million nitrogen. We would expect it not to grow very well. And then this one up here is the 50 parts per million of nitrogen. And then these other ones are the treatments that exceeded that rate. So what's exciting to see is that in this case, when we're providing continuous doses, that 50 ppm, the lower rate, is actually the one that improves crop performance. We see that in this case in terms of the cannabidiol and the THC. Now notice here, the genetic that we used exceeded the THC threshold. So it's something that we've seen continuously across our trials and something we're working to address. So this is a follow-up experiment that a master's student of mine did, just a few containers that we tried, but instead of doing the continuous dosing of the fertilizer, we used a granular fertilizer and showed that this sort of medium value here, so if we applied the fertilizer weekly, that 200 ppm of nitrogen was the better performer. So this bar is a little bit bigger, but not statistically. So in the science, we like to say, let's use the rate that it shows that sort of consistent pattern. Use a little less, maybe. We also did it outside. And this is a picture from Homestead. We took these wife plants and we planted them out, and we, again, had different rates, 0 pounds of nitrogen per the acre to 250. And that's really cool to see because it matches our initial guidelines, right? Somewhere between 100 and 150 pounds of nitrogen per the acre. Again, we have meaningful productivity above that rate, but in terms of drawing back on leaching and impacts to the environment, that 100 to 150 pounds is, at least in this preliminary study, something to look at. So I'm kind of mixing my message a little bit, right? I started with the beginning, like we're just getting started. We don't have really good guidelines. Some of our data has agreed with those guidelines, but and also at the same time, hey, farmers, maybe it's a good idea to be monitoring your soils and your plants. Well, this is a fun project that we tried where we flew a drone over our hemp fields with these fertility treatments. And so these little red dots here are the hemp plants that are in my field. And so we have some little tiny hemp plants, and we have some bigger hemp plants. And so the drone was able to capture using a vegetative index called NDVI, which compares the bands of red and near infrared. And so we're able to show that these NDVI values also line up pretty nicely with the plant mass at harvest. So I'm not recommending everybody go out and buy a drone so that you can figure out how much to fertilize your hemp plants, but there's certainly something there about greenness. You can do that by leaf tissue testing as well throughout the year to figure out how to make your fertility management site-specific and adaptive. Moving from the flour production system into the grain and fiber, this is some of the messy data that we're looking at after the first year. And so these are 3 sites. Let me walk you through it here. The red site is the Central Florida location, the blue site is West Florida, and the green site is Trek. We're doing our best here. But what comes out, again, is this landing on that 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per the acre. So just to reiterate my point, it seems as though hemp needs some fertility in order to perform well. This panel here is just a comparison of the different rates, looking at the better performance in the 100 to 150. So just to summarize a little bit, the preliminary research, along with our guidelines, seems to support that less than 150 pounds of nitrogen per the acre. Please be cautious as you apply fertilizer to not exceed, as those rates can also cause declines in productivity in some cases. Best practice across the board for fertility in Florida is to split applications at about a 50-pound nitrogen rate. Said it once, I'll say it again. In the terms of hemp, more does not mean better. And in one of those ways, excessive nitrogen can delay flowering and cannabinoid production. We've also seen reports of excess of nitrogen also impacting fiber quality. An interesting question I see come up frequently is that your fertility management can impact the cannabinoid production, and that does not seem to play out in the majority of research. In fact, THC production and other cannabinoids seems to be more driven by genetics, maybe 85 to 90%, and the environment is just another 10% or so. It's a plug for some of the things we've seen anecdotally to be watching out for micronutrient deficiency. We've seen manganese toxicity in excessive nitrogen rates, and we've also seen the magnesium deficiency in some of our plants. So we're at work trying to put together this information for the farmers, and are happy to be able to show our preliminary results. So if you're interested in any of this or what is going on at the University of Florida, you're welcome to visit our website, programs.ifas.ufl.edu/hemp. The QR code here will bring you to that site, and we also have plenty of information and the same links available at our booth as well. So I think that is a wrap for me, and I am going to allow us time for 2 questions. Does anybody have any questions about hemp fertility? How many farmers are in the room today? Oh, all right, nice to meet you all. Thanks for coming.
The produce side and whatnot, but somebody told me Florida was hard to grow natively outdoors. Can you discuss the soil here versus the soil in Colorado with the altitude changes and the moisture and things like that? Are we in a better position closer to the equator? Is there too much sunshine, or what's optimal?
Yeah, another presentation that I give lists all the challenges for growing hemp in Florida. This presentation is more like the, hey, we can grow hemp in Florida, and these are some of the ways that we've shown how. Organic matter is a big thing that differentiates Florida from other parts of the country. The latitude of light, so that just purely the length of day, which is something cannabis responds to, is another something. We've heard reports of farmers yesterday bringing hemp from northern latitudes, and it flowers after just a couple of weeks of growth. The other issue is just that everything likes to grow down here, so the pests and diseases as well, we're seeing come up. So that was a good question, thanks. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next presentation. We're going to leave the, someone asked a question. We're gonna have a whole interactive session after we're done with our presentation, so we hope to hear questions from the group. So with that, I am going to introduce Ethan Carter, who's going to tell us a little bit about our extension system and what we're doing in support of the hemp farmers of Florida.
All right, so I'm going to do like Matt and figure out how to work this, hopefully. And it would appear that I'm doing very bad at it. So, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So, like I said earlier, my name is Ethan Carter. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the pilot project and a recap overall. So that's going to be the first half of this presentation, kind of a broad overall scope. And then we're going to kind of drill down on farm-specific interactions with our partners. And that's what Jay's going to cover when I switch it over to him. All right. So kicking us off here on our first slide, who is Extension? What is Extension? If you don't know of us from the couple of talks that have been going on, think of Extension as the connection, boots on the ground, to the research that's taking place at the university level. So the university has research stations across the state. It's also, the University of Florida is in Gainesville, all right? That's where the Gators are. So each county has their own extension office where they have agents that work with farmers, work with 4-H youth, work with other clientele. And so we're kind of that extension cord that reaches from Gainesville to all 67 counties, all right? So that's what we do. We move that research-based data from where it's generated at the university level to the general public, to the farmers, to our counties. All right, so this is our county map, or our state map. You're going to see it again. Matt showed you a couple of different variations of it. So you see it's 5 colors. Those are our 5 extension districts. The highlighted counties that are outlined in bold are our project partners for the pilot project, okay? So that's where we had at least one on-farm trial, and I'll get to those here in the next couple of slides, but you will see this again. And then we have Century Tower because, the University of Florida is in all 67 counties. There's an extension office there and someone to help you in every county, all right? So our project and all of our findings have culminated in this one resource page. I shouldn't say that. This research page has all of our findings and all of our pubs, all right? So if you come by our IFAS booth in the next room, we have a number of these different publications. There are some QR codes that take you to this website, all right? This is where you would find them. FAQ is frequently asked questions. There's a whole bunch of them, all right? Some of them have been asked today for various talks. We've got our resource page where maybe you're curious about the bugs or pests in hemp. Maybe you're curious about, the fertility work that's been done, XYZ. All of those resources are on this page, and at the bottom left, you can see where we've put the URL, all right? But if you go to Google and type in, UF Hemp Pilot Project, this page is the first thing that pops up for you, all right? So this is one of my bigger slides. So it's talking about varieties and our on-farm testing and things, and it's this one and the next one. So what did we do as University of Florida with our pilot project? We evaluated fiber, grain, and flower varieties statewide in field and greenhouse settings, all right? That's what we did. So we handled 108 varieties is what we were looking at, and at the end of our 2-year project, we had 21 that we approved for plant material, all right, through our approval program. You can see 10 of those were done in 2020, 11 were done in 2021. If you're interested to know what those specific varieties were or what was done which year, the full list is available at FDACS. That QR code literally opens up to the document that lists those varieties, okay? But again, it's all on the FDACS website, just like you can find permitted acreage and where those counties are, where those farms are. You can also find the approved seed and clones. So our 21 varieties were approved for clone material. So this is my map again. Remember I mentioned those bolded counties are where we had on-farm partners. All right, so this is, glowing pride that we have with our pilot project. We worked with 18 farms in 2020 across 13 counties, all right? And so I'm glad Matt went first to talk about the permitted acreage and show those transition numbers. So, the southern part of the state had a lot more permits, early on. A lot of our on-farm trial partners were in the southern part of the state because that's just where the applications came from. We had an application process. We were screening for different parameters. There were about 10 people that were evaluating the applications to say which one of these would best be suited for our pilot project as a partner, all right? So where I am in the Panhandle, my partner was in Gulf County. You can see it's outlined. And so that grower will actually be here tomorrow speaking on the program, Catherine Arnold with Florida Panhandle Hemp. So I encourage you to hear her talk, and hopefully she'll say some good things about IFAS. We did a lot of work with her the first year and a little bit of work with her last year. Unfortunately, in Gulf County, the first year, like some other people have mentioned, we planted not once but 2 different times, and both times we had substantial rain following that planting, and it just kind of washed away what we had done. At that trial location, we were doing direct seeding into the ground. So the point of this slide, and to showcase, we were working with 18 farms statewide. These are all different growing conditions, all different types of cropping systems, all right? So trying to work into an existing rotation or farming for the first time. So our PI Center for UF, our Public Issues and Education Center, did some surveys and tried to gather data statewide for our pilot project, all right? They generated a lot of data. These are just 3 things that I pulled into this presentation. So overall response to the pilot project was a positive experience, all right? Then we have our pros and our cons that they found, all right? So the pros, seed donations, attentive program leaders, low startup costs from partnering with us for the pilot project, quick application process with FDACS, and then extension support. So we went out troubleshooting disease, insects, do soil testing, water testing. The challenges that all of these growers run into, issues with strains, varieties, weather conditions were major, pesticides use and pests, XYZ, all right, direct seeding. So with that, I'm gonna give you my last slide here before I turn it over to Jay. So again, the pilot project and all of our hemp trials, the goal was to assess these different varieties in the different parts of Florida for our environmental conditions, our different growing systems, with the goal of increasing, relationships both with industry, with the growers, with the research, and then to see what infrastructure we had available and where we need to improve, all right? And some of those points have been made during this conference as well. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jay Capasso.
Thank you, Ethan. How do I change it? Hi, everybody. I'm Jay. I'm the row crop agent in Columbia County. And we had a couple on-farm trials in northeast Florida. We had an on-farm trial in Levy County, and then an on-farm trial in Columbia County in 2020. And basically, these trials, or at least the one in Columbia County, which I will be speaking to, we had a UF section of the field where we tried some University of Florida provided varieties. And then we had an industry and farmer portion of the field where they selected their own varieties and farmed according to their objectives. So in the University of Florida section of the field in Columbia County in 2020, we planted both Maverick and cherry wine varieties. The Maverick is a day-neutral variety, and the cherry wine is a day-sensitive variety or a photoperiod-sensitive variety. So we had one or more different land prep configurations. So some of the Maverick that was planted on bare ground, and we didn't have much success with the Maverick, at least with a bare ground planting by seed. And then we also experimented with single rows on plastic. This was all grown on plastic after watermelon season. And we did that with both single rows and twin rows. So these are some of the pictures. You can see the watermelon crop, I guess on your left-hand side. And the watermelon season was very good in 2020. They had a very high price on watermelon. So the grower wanted to keep the field in watermelon as long as he could to get as many melons as he could out of the field. So we didn't end up planting this field until about August or mid-August. And you can see the hemp growing on the plastic after watermelon. Some of the plastic was beat up by this point in the season. When they plant watermelon, they plant it in the end of February, early March. So that plastic had been in the field for quite a while. And you see some of the weeds and Bermuda grass and other pressure in the field by this point in the season. Some of the pests that we ran into were fire ants and nematodes. If you're not familiar with nematodes, they're little microscopic worms, and some of them are plant parasitic. So that's where you see the bumps on those roots there. They kind of look like legumes will have, but they're nematode damage. So you can see the picture of the workers for my farmer planting the transplants of hemp in mid-August. You can see the summertime thunderstorm in the background, and you can see some of the weeds in the field and that some of the plastic had been damaged by that point. But they're planting transplants, and another thing they did before they planted was they went through the field when it was fallow and sprayed paraquat or gramoxone, which would be the product name. So that's one way they got the field ready for harvest. Two of the varieties we used in the UF section were the cherry wine and the Mavericks. So I told you that the Mavericks didn't grow very well by seed, but they did grow when the farmer took the Maverick seed and took it to his greenhouse and then grew it there and then planted them as transplants. I believe the first variety you see there to your left would be the cherry wine, and then the variety to your right would have been the Mavericks that was grown in the transplants, or grown in the greenhouse as transplants. So some of the goals of this on-farm trial were to kind of get started working with growers on hemp in Florida. So we wanted to collect data on fertilization. Most of the fertilizer went out through the drip tape, similar to watermelon. So liquid fertilizer, the irrigation was provided through drip tape as well. And then we sampled soils, we sampled plant material, and these were just some of the goals. We harvested plant height, plant biomass, and flower biomass at the end of the season, and we collected management information. We collected information about fertilization methods and schedules, irrigation methods and schedules, stand establishment, the time to maintain the crop, and the total cost of management. And we also noted any other issues that we saw, like when we saw fire ant damage in the field. So we planted in August 17th and 18th. And our row configuration was 24-inch wide beds. So the plastic row there was 24-inch wide. The spacing between the plastic rows was 12 feet. And then the spacing between the plants was 2 feet in the drill. And we tried two different plant populations. The first plant population is 1,815 plants to the acre. And then the twin row population was 3,630 plants to the acre. Most of the field was under single row plant population. There was only a small section that was under twin row. I don't have any data from that, but my understanding from the grower and the other extension agent who led the project at the time was that the twin row did do pretty well. So we planted this field with the transplants in August 17th and August 18th in North Florida in the Lake City area. Can anybody tell me any problem that we might have with that? Well, hurricanes. Yeah, the lighting. So the Maverick was day neutral, but most of our field was not Maverick. But the cherry wine and the golden sunset, which was in the industry section of the field, was all daytime sensitive. So they made the decision to put industrial lights out on the south end of the field. So you can see the very large light there in the right-hand corner. And we saw very different growth in the hemp based on where it was in the field because of that. On the south end of the field, you could see that the hemp grew a lot taller, and it put on a lot more vegetative growth because of the lights on at night, about 2 hours every night, compared to the north end of the field, which was further away from the lights. So having those lights there made this possible. Without that, we would have seen very early flowering. And then you can see some of the other pictures that we had. This picture in the center was some of the plants that were on the south end of the field that grew very well and grew very tall. So these are some more pictures from the trial. We loaded up 10 plants from 2 different varieties and then brought it back to the research center in Live Oak to measure yield. And they wanted to put that in my pickup truck at first. I told them no, it was going in the government pickup truck. I was not bringing that over across town. You can see us collecting some of the plants from the field. And then you can see a picture of me there, still amazed that University of Florida is allowing me to do this. So we brought those plants back to the research center in Live Oak, and we dried them out. You can see the whole plants drying out there. We weighed the plants before we dried them. And then we dried them and separated the vegetative weight from the flower. So these are some of our yield results from those 10 plants that was harvested for both varieties, both the Golden Sunset, which was in the industry section, and the cherry wine that was in the University of Florida section of the field. The Golden Sunset was a little bit taller. It was about around 39.6 inches on average, compared to the cherry wine, which was 35.45 inches on average. The average green weight, which was the average weight of the plant after we harvested it, was 3.46 pounds in the Golden Sunset and 2.71 pounds in the cherry wine. The average dry weight, which was the whole plant dried out, was 1.2 pounds in the Golden Sunset variety, and then 0.95 pounds in the cherry wine variety. The average flower mass dry was 0.71 pounds in the Golden Sunset variety and 0.58 pounds in the cherry wine variety. So if we scale that up to the entire field, and I think it's really important that you note that we harvested these plants on the south side of the field, right near the industrial lights. So this was the best section of the field. This doesn't represent the entire field, especially the north end section that was further away from the lights that flowered earlier. So this is the best section of the field. We found 1,282.48 pounds on average to the acre of the flower in the Golden Sunset variety, compared to 1,059.23 pounds in the cherry wine variety. We also took a sample to measure the THC content about a month before we harvested. And you can see that about a little under a month after planting, we were already at 50% flowering. And again, on one side of the field, we were flowering much earlier than the other because of those lights. And the producer managed this using those industrial grade light units. The official THC sample was sent in about mid-October, and you can see the numbers there. If I remember correctly, we were around 7% CBD when we sent the sample in, and we were at 0.266% THC. So the plant was cleared for harvest. And we harvested less than a month after that sample was taken. One other thing I would mention about this trial before we take questions is that we did successfully grow the crop, especially in the section of the field that was near those industrial lights. But the farmer, to my knowledge, was never able to sell the hemp. He was able to grow it, but he wasn't able to sell it. I'm not sure if a contract was dropped or he just could not find a buyer. But I think that's important to note that he wasn't able to sell any of his crop.
Thank you, Jay. We'll accept that applause for all of our speakers. Thank you very much. Josh over here has a question.
Hello, how you doing? Think that was a great presentation. My name's Josh Linney. I'm a veteran and I run a nonprofit here in Florida that helps other veterans learn to grow. Actually, I'll help anyone learn to grow, but I focus on veterans. So I had a couple of questions about your presentation. One, you mentioned about using the lights to prevent the plants from going into flower, but you didn't really explain why the plants were going into flower. So I think it'd probably just be helpful to cover that they need 18 hours of light or they drop out of the vegetative cycle. Some people here might not understand that. So that was the need for the lighting. In Florida, the Sunshine State only gets about 14 to 16 hours typically. So without introducing additional artificial supplemental light, you won't get a minimum of 18 hours, which is why the plant triggers itself going from vegetation to flowering, which is why they had a problem with the lighting. The other question I had was on your yield estimate that you made with the calculations you had, would that be based on a single placing or the double spacing row?
That was the single spacing.
Yeah, Josh, what yield are you going for when you're trying to harvest commercially?
Well, we would probably do a 6-foot center on our plants rather than a 12-foot. I know you guys were using, machinery and stuff, but I probably would look at somewhere, probably the same numbers, half to a pound, half to 3/4. I mean, I think anybody who's trying to get more than a pound a plant in Florida is probably just dreaming, to be quite honest. But I think half pound is a safe estimate if you're going for a full 120-day, 90-day, run, if you can get a good vegetation cycle out of it.
Yeah.
But I was just curious because when you said you were doing the double spacing row, I wasn't sure if you meant that you were planting too close together or if you were like going in the middle of that 12-foot center. So I just wasn't sure.
Two plants per bed.
Okay, in the same 24 inches.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
that's right. I agree with you. In some of the previous studies that I was showing you, our plant spacing is on the 6-foot beds. So absolutely, that 1 pound of flower per plant, it does seem to be a goal kind of nationally. So even just in the first year, we saw some good results. I think kind of a general comment across the conference so far to just acknowledge is that it's pretty clear that we can grow hemp in Florida, right? The plant will grow in Florida. Whether or not you can grow it to commercial productivity and do so and make money and have someone to sell it to, I think those are still some open questions.
Yeah, that was just my last comment. Nobody's being able to sell flower, not just your farmer. It's a statewide problem with supply and demand, and there's no connection. So
yeah, absolutely.
There's no infrastructure. So you're farmers just like the rest of us.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. This next, let's see, we have 30 minutes left in the session. So this next 30 minutes is really meant to be a workshop. Just as Josh contributed some insight about how to grow, we'd like to hear from the farmers in the room. I'd like to walk through this farm plan just so that it's the folks in the room understand that it's not just, I want some hemp seed or hemp fiber or hemp flower. Let me put it in the ground and wait 6 months or 6 months. What am I talking about? Like 3 months, 3.5 months, and all of a sudden I got hemp production. So I really wanted to take the opportunity to talk through that and sort of think about all of the things that a farmer's going to need to do and really should think about ahead of putting a crop in the ground in order to have the best chance for success. So we didn't have a chance to really talk deeply about the hemp physiology, brought up the idea of the flowering, which tends to respond to the length of night. And so not only do the genetics need to be productive in Florida, but in order to do that, they need to match our latitude. They need to match our environment. Not only do these genetics need to have those characteristics in order to be productive in our state, but they're probably going to be targeted at a specific crop type for hemp. So I think about hemp as 3 different crops. And over the years, I've sort of collected some of these generalities from across the country about what we might expect. Those details are here on this page that I passed around. For anybody who is participating with us online, I believe that you received an email from Jean with these forms that we're going to be working with. So go ahead and check your email, see if that's there, and then you can participate along with us online. So I'm just going to walk through these details quickly. Fiber crop, it is the highest density of planting for hemp because you generally want slender stalks for bast. I have some new partners that are very interested in the herd and might completely transform the way that I think about fiber production. But in any case, around the country, around the world, folks producing for bast fiber, they're often doing it in an agronomic system, so it's flat ground, direct seeded, in some cases exceeding 1 million seeds per acre. And this is a crop that is harvested just at the first flower, and so it takes about 90 to 100 days in most places in order to do that. And it is, again, sort of agronomy where you're machine harvesting, trying to make those margins at a low cost, low value. This morning we saw Dr. Cherney sort of represent the high risk, low reward situation that he was thinking about for fiber, and it really comes down to those margins. Next slide, please. So the seed takes two types of plants here. Another interesting piece about cannabis physiology is that there are male and female plants out in the field, and so in the fiber crop you are harvesting kind of both and doing that before flowering. But in order to make seed, you need both males and females out in the field, and it takes that pollen that's dispersed by the wind in order to produce those seeds. Again, this is an agronomic system, flat ground. We've been trying it in Homestead in small mounds, bean mounds, 3-foot mounds, but again, it's direct seeded at slightly less, about 250,000 plants per the acre. And because the plants need to produce their flowers and mature into seeds, it takes a little bit longer, up to 120 days. Again, pollination is necessary, and harvesting by mechanization, though I would note oftentimes standard mowers and combines are used, and I have seen I've seen pictures of them burning in the field. Okay, so you add resin into your combine and it keeps going, it picks up some fiber, it keeps going, and then there's combustion. Okay, next slide, please. So I just mentioned to you that one of our crops, the seed crop, requires pollination in order to be productive. Now this is a flower crop, which is primarily responsible for the cannabinoid production that you folks have heard about. And this is very much a horticultural type system where you have raised and covered beds. In some cases it's grown indoors. These are female clones that are transplanted out into the field, somewhere between 2,500 to 10,000 plants an acre. Some of the dwarfing varieties that are also day neutral have been seeded as many as 20,000 plants per the acre. Again, because of the diversity in genetics, we have some crops that'll turn over quickly, 45 to 60 days, and some take the whole 120 days. Up for debate about which you like. I heard from Mr. Treadwell earlier today, and he said they tend to plant later in the year, maybe even as late as July or August in order to get that quick turnaround. So still feeling out what it's going to mean for pollen for Florida. Now, just to make that point, the cannabinoids develop in unpollinated flowers, which would be a big problem if your neighbor was trying to make seeds. Right? Okay, so how do we figure this out as an industry? Definitely something that regulators and scientists and farmer and communities are trying to figure out. So these are often harvested by hand and timed up just appropriately so that you meet your THC threshold compliance. This is more of a high-cost, high-value proposition, so different sort of risks that you're taking in the field. With that, if you could please put up the form, my team is going to go out in the room with a bunch of microphones, and we're going to sort of walk through this. Like, this is the farm plan. Farmers out there that have done this successfully, I would imagine that you can walk through this and fill out every of these boxes, right? I'm curious if that's true. I'm curious if you have questions or things that are surprising. A unique thing for hemp, of course, is having to do the THC testing ahead of harvest, and so that's an extra thing. You're going to need to have a license, and hopefully you have a chance to fill out this form ahead of planting so that you have the sort of full system that you're going to be working with. So I'm going to open up the room to questions. I'm going to sort of talk through this a little bit organically. This is not meant to be overwhelming per se, but it's really meant to illustrate all the things that we need to think about in order to be successful planting this crop. So any questions about any of these presentations or about this farm plan, or just things that are burning in your mind that you'd like to ask a team of scientists and educators? It's like you're back in school again, right?
Industrial warehouse that I have, I'd be interested, are there any grants or can you apply for any assistance to buy the lighting and the equipment and sort of maybe map up to a study? Like I'd like to study it for personal consumption and home grow or those types of things. So what's some resources that are available?
Yeah, farming grants. I mean, that's a very interesting question. There are certainly grants in order to incorporate sustainability measures into your farm. So that might be the micro drip irrigation systems or hedgerows, cover crops, things like that. In my mind, I come up more like farming loans as opposed to farming grants. There are certainly new farmer programs. Is that run by, does FDACS have a new farmer program, or is that a different situation? Okay. Anyways, there are new business and farming support out there. I don't have a. Do you fellas have direct?
So I can say, as far as grants go, like Zach said, there's a lot on there for sustainability. Most of them are not just direct grants. A lot of them are cost-sharing agreements. Right. So you need to go ahead and purchase the material, and then the agency you're working with will reimburse you up to a certain percentage of that. As far as with lighting in particular, I don't know if this has changed recently, but I have been working really closely with Florida hops growers. Both Cannabaceae, they also have issues with having to use artificial lighting. And when they put in those lighting systems, though we worked very closely with state resources to help them out with putting in better irrigation systems and soil moisture meters and things like that, there were no cost-sharing programs for the lights in particular.
This isn't to this per se. Thank you. I appreciate it. Jody James with Florida Cannabis Action Network. You said there was paraquat in the field that you were getting ready to grow hemp in, and that just kind of freaked me out because I remember the days when they were spraying paraquat to kill cannabis, and the concern back then was that the paraquat was going to be poison to the end user. So I'll bring that up because in the tests, have you started looking at any bioremediation effects of hemp? And do you intend down the road to look at a bioremediation of hemp? One of the things that I learned recently is that a lot of the spray fields that we're using for waste and are contaminating the field with pharmaceutical drugs. So pharmaceutical drugs get into the water system. Pharmaceutical drugs are now poisoning, if I'm used like C, is now poisoning the spray fields. And so now I'm like, where do we go to get the information to find out if there's going to be a bioremediator effect? And I want to make sure that any cannabis that's being grown, hemp cannabis plant that's going to be grown for human consumption isn't being grown around something like paraquat.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. So let me be clear about an important point, and one of the pages on your reference sheet has a resource which is the approved list of pesticides and herbicides for hemp. So to be clear, what happened at that farm that Jay was mentioning was the paraquat would have cleaned the field from the watermelon because the paraquat's not listed for hemp, right? As far as plants taking up these sorts of chemicals, that really comes down to a residence time issue. So how long is this stay in the soil? And I would think that the residues for pesticides are more likely having been applied directly to the flowers as opposed to being taken up by the plant. So we'll see phytoremediation of heavy metals and things like that. But the pesticides themselves are larger molecules that aren't taken up by the plant, would break down into other constituent parts ahead of being concerned. So that's an important and a great question, and really comes up against the available options. So how many herbicides are on that pesticide list? Are there any yet? I don't think so. Sonolin has been approved by Canada and is a possible option to be coming down here as well, but really poses the challenge. Our first trials in Quincy, Florida, so the Panhandle, was just completely overrun with weeds. Like, I think it's been said a couple times, and we'll see if farmers nod their head, but hemp is kind of a wimpy seedling. Does someone disagree? They're like, yeah, hemp's got the strength at the beginning. But like 3 weeks later, you're like, yeah, right? Puts on its straw, it's ready to go. But this plant won't push up the soil if you get crusty clay, right? It's not going to initially outcompete a stand of nutsedge, right? Okay, I kind of want to hear from this side of the room. I saw a whole bunch of hands when I asked about farmers. Like, is this something that you do? Do you have answers? Yeah, please.
So next door, he has the hemp for water, and he cleans water with the hemp. So he takes out all the stuff that's bad in the water with the hemp. So that's what I'm not understanding how that doesn't get taken up, because hemp takes stuff out of the soil or takes stuff out of the water. It really like cleans up whatever is in that soil.
Well, the way that I understand it is the plant is taking up fertilizers that are in the water. Okay, that's not the same as taking up chemicals in the water, right? It's the chemicals would break down into nitrogen and phosphorus, which then the plant roots would have access to, and they would take it up in that form. Right? There are a lot of water bodies here in Florida that are heavy in phosphates from historical and urban, historical agriculture, urban, that's a whole separate conversation, you know. But it goes back to like the nutrient management work that was like, let's not be the problem, folks, right? Like, I think most of us are here because we're like, yeah, hemp, yeah, environment, right? So there's a real balance here. Who feels like they have a pretty solid fertility program for their plants? Okay. Is it just like lunch was super good? The cake's just like getting to you right now. They didn't offer me any coffee for lunch. I wanted some coffee. What's your biggest challenges? What are you folks running into when you're trying to grow hemp? Third microphone ready to go around the room, is that right?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I grew hemp last year in California, far away from Florida here, and believe it or not, our biggest challenge wasn't really growing it. The biggest challenge was overregulation of it. There were a lot of expenses. Just to get the registration was expensive. They required the background check on it. They required somebody to come by and take a look at it. And while a lot of these things seem innocuous or not that much of a challenge, a lot of those numbers add up. In California, they required that any money spent by the state for hemp regulation had to be brought in or had to be offset by the registration fees. And just to hire one person there was around $170,000. Not that was their pay, but it was their pay, salary, health benefits. They had to have a background check, things like that. And then, since the state is so big, anytime they had to send somebody out, they would charge the farmer again. And if that's beyond a few hours, round trip, Florida's a very big state as well. that can start adding up to, $800, $1,200 just to have somebody come out and take a look at your field. Surprisingly, you mentioned herbicides. We have no problem whatsoever with any weeds or even insects. In fact, the hemp grew very well out there.
Interesting. Thank you very much. I know that there were some testing labs that were participants in the meeting. Are any of those representatives here? Okay, good. We can talk openly. Yeah. So that's like a whole nother financial burden, right? The testing contracts. What are folks paying in order to have someone available to test their field pre-harvest? $350? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Every other sample. And that's an additional $350 each time you have? But hundreds of dollars, right? So that's like another thing that you got to figure out how to do as a hemp farmer. The evaluation forms, they're over here on the table. I left them while I was wandering. Yes, ma'am. I'll come bring this to you. Sure. Yes, please. He beat me to it.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ashley Gonzalez. I'm with Hemp Advisors. I'm a local farmer in Fort Pierce, and I had a question about nematodes. Those little microscopic worms. What bug lays those? Where do they come from?
They are an organism themselves.
Okay.
And they're everywhere.
Not a lot of people know about them.
There are some that are parasites. There are some that are predators.
Mm-hmm.
There are some that just kind of live in the soil. Are nematodes the most diverse organism globally? Like. Okay. Yeah, they fuel ecosystems. We have a couple that are challenged in Florida. One is called the root knot nematode. Another is called the sting nematode. And so these are common plant pests for crops in Florida. Some crops will bring them in. So okra down in Florida will bring in some nematodes. There are also other things, other crops, cover crops like crotalaria, sun hemp, that can be used to suppress nematodes. So it's just a whole nother layer of growing plants here in Florida.
Yeah,
have you run into these little critters?
Yeah, yeah.
That's fine. Everyone. So Ethan is passing around a little survey here in Extension. In order to do our jobs well, we like to get feedback about what you're learning and how we're doing. So I don't see a whole lot of folks scribbling on their farm plan, which is fine. Maybe you have a chance to think about it later on and give it a try. But if you do scribble on anything, please consider filling out the survey that we're sending around so that we can tell our bosses that we're doing a good job. Other questions, other concerns, other feedback, things you'd like to share with the group?
So, Sydney again with Munsa Industries. So I just registered, renewed 700 acres for fiber production in Hardy County. And the intention is to start planting within the next 30 days. It's very, I'm noticing the problem is too much planting and we don't have enough processing. So this is where I'm heading at. So it will be the planting, the processing, and the distributing. So why don't the farmers, for example, I cannot have enough acreage to process the amount of fiber that I know I need to process. So we can create some kind of hemp farmer collaboration where I can process the hemp, the extra hemp that they have, let's say for cotton or let's say for the hempcrete, like we said. But you don't need someone to buy the hempcrete from you, for example. It's just the herd, you mix with the lime, you have hempcrete. So just package it in those herd bags that they use in Home Depot or Lowe's. So just use that. All I'm saying, let's create our own industry. Let's not keep waiting, okay, we're planting the fiber, do we have someone to sell it to? So let's create our own industry locally, especially that the planting that is done in the state of Florida, you cannot import other fibers from other states. So let's keep the local economy going. But my concern is, I'm thinking of just planting, oh, I'm gonna go plant 700 acres, and exactly, it's not gonna work like that. So the question is, first, I know the state of Florida have 4 kind of seeds that I think that were being tested to be planted. We cannot just plant any seeds. Also, which kind of seed would you recommend for fiber, for high yield fiber production, instead of the oil, and also irrigation. I wanted to use drip irrigation system. And fertilizer, as far as fertilizer, would we need a lot of fertilizer, since the hemp plant itself is an naturally antimicrobial plant, and I want to grow organic type of things? Do we have to have fertilizer, pesticide in the fields?
Thank you, Sydney.
Based on your testing, you
Uh-huh.
fertilizer or pesticide,
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. You want all the answers to the quiz, don't you? Uh-huh. Yeah, let me try to step through that a little bit. So the first piece about developing a market, finding an outlet for the products. As you mentioned, the herd, I think there is an opportunity there to generate motivation for growing hemp, for an outlet for hemp through the herd, whether it's animal bedding or the hempcrete. You put the lime with the herd and you pass it all around, or something like that. Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm sorry, I made a bad joke. So 5 minutes, right? So the seeds. So we talked a little bit with Holly earlier today, and she was mentioning the challenge with the seed quality. That certified with a capital C thing that's going on, right? That has substantially limited access to seeds in Florida in compliance. Okay, so how do you know that you have seeds that are certified capital C? Well, they have to have ASCA certification, and that process has just started, and there might be a small handful available from the whole country. Okay, you mentioned what's available in the state. There was also work done by FAMU and their partners in order to screen some seeds and prove them through the pilot project, make them available to the state. And then I'm going to ask the farmers, how's access to seeds going for you folks? It's easy? There's a list on FDEX. It is one of the resources here.
Zach, I think it's important to mention that I believe FDAX will recognize any other state agency across the country that has a certification process. And we share this with the state of Connecticut, where they recognize pilot project approved cultivars and seed, and we would recognize those type of approved genetics from the state of Connecticut. So I think I'm correct in that. And this includes, for the most part, even those abroad, if they can provide some type of certification. But that I'm not as confident on. So I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. That's very helpful. What does certified mean? It means reliably less than 0.3% THC. Does it mean that it grows well in Florida? Not at all. Have we seen a successful fiber crop in the state of Florida yet? It could be happening. Nobody's come to me like, fiber in Florida. It's like, yeah. How long does it take to drive a tractor over 700 acres?
Matter of fact, just last week I was speaking to a contractor from
Depends what you're
Mm-hmm.
because I was under the impression I would have to buy the tractor and all of that, and he said that all I do is tell him that the tractor is over. He told me it was like 50 acres an hour or something like that.
Okay, wow. Well, so, I mean, the specific answer to the question is, well, if you need to cultivate and disc twice and then prep the field and seed 700 acres in a month, and it rains every other day, and you can't get your tractor in because it's wet, this is just the things to think about as you're planning out your farm, your crops. So. You asked a couple other questions, but the fertilizer, of course, is a whole nother thing. Which genetics should we use? The genetics that are performing the best are also at the highest risk of exceeding the 0.3% THC. They're also pretty like stocky, they're bulky, so maybe good for the herd. For the bast, I don't know. But the point that I want to emphasize in closing, perhaps, maybe I'll give. No, we don't have time for another question. You can come see us, please, at the booth. We really are doing this together. The transition between 2019 and 2020 was really exciting for us at the university, because instead of us just like, hey, we got hemp, see what it looks like, we actually had a chance to move on farm and interact with farmers and field some questions from experience. So as we go through this, we certainly want to be here to support your efforts. Can certainly sit down and answer your questions or tell you what information is available in more detail. Please feel free to reach out to us and visit us at the booth or consider partnering with the University of Florida for future efforts. I'm putting together a program that's supported by FIHCE for emerging enterprises, trying to put some commercialization opportunities to hemp cultivation. We have to do that in a way that minimizes invasion risk, which is a separate thing to consider. But between our goals here as a community to move forward with this commodity, to do so in a way that is conservative of the environment and responsible to our farming and communities, thank you very much to my team at the University of Florida. Thank you to Jean and everybody who came to participate. Please fill out your survey and leave it on the table for us, or we'll come by and get them.
All right, and lastly, just as a reminder, if you have an interest in seeing a mobile decoricator, it is outside the doors. So if you want to take a quick peek at Steve Edmonds, what he came up with, enjoy it. And we're on break right now. We'll be back here in 30 minutes.